So if you're starting your own character project, it's really important to break it down into individual components, sort of understand what materials you're making, how many UV sets. And that can be sometimes difficult if you haven't started your own character. Going forth with a strategy is going to save you a lot of time and also making sure you're focusing on the right areas. For my background as an art director and a character artist and university lecturer, I help people on the members list every week sort of break down their projects and make sure that they're applying the right sort of time to the right areas. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, go and click the join below. There's loads of details there. Really nice to have an intricate community where you can stay accountable and turn up every week for your own sort of project. Also nice to get a bit of advice from someone who's hired in the industry and also been through the entire process themselves. So enjoy the members video extract. And don't forget to click the link below where there's loads of free resources that I give out on the main website. I was going to originally break down a character that I made about 5 years ago. So it was a character that really excelled my portfolio. Got me a lot of jobs, to be honest, and got featured on a couple of front pages. Physically got featured in the Best Substance Art of the Year. And I did a couple of things right on that project, and I just want to share it with you guys. So hopefully you could potentially emulate that, almost like a bit of a case study. So more interestingly, we had some people suggest basically some projects they were starting. What we'll also do is open those up and I'll break it down to how I would approach it if I was starting that project. So this is something that you can get used to. And then as we do it together, you're going to learn a lot from it and you can take it onto your future projects. How does that sound? Okay, so we're going to go through these two, the two that was selected. Then that's what these weekly sessions are for. So for people who are watching the video and might be new and how to interact with this community, we have the YouTube VIP section. So this is basically where I release updates for you. We can talk about what sort of lectures you want covered. So this one's basically based on our conversations in the YouTube VIP. And then also, if you want to take a bit more backseat or not come to the live sessions, but still post your updates, then there's the work in progress forum. I really suggest you take advantage of that if you have entered into one of these memberships, just so you can progress and keep consistent with a project. So it's really cool to see you guys, how fast you're going and upgrading already. You know, it hasn't even been a month, which is really awesome. So I'd like to pose these questions to people to sort of keep you inspired. Is who do you want to be as an artist? So think about that for a little bit. Obviously, some people are a bit detracted by this. It can feel a bit fluffy, but it's really, really important because what you're producing in terms of how you're going to apply that to your time. So it's a very important question just to ask. Give about 1 minute to it. So when you're making a project, think to yourself, are you the person who's copying a base mesh or starting from a base mesh? Which is totally okay. If you're in the industry and you're experienced, you want to save some time because you're getting paid hourly. When you're learning, you really don't want to start with a base mesh. The only person you're defeating is yourself. So when I'm teaching every year, unfortunately, a lot of submissions, people feel the pressure, start from a base mesh. And as I see over 3 years, they're the people that don't get the jobs. And it's the start of an ethos that really puts you back behind on things. So with the current advent of things like MetaHuman, it's so attractive to start that and get the early rewards of looking like you're a good artist. But really remember why you're here. You're here to practice. You're here to develop as an artist and then produce really interesting final content. So on that topic, also ask yourself, are you directly just copying other artists? So if you're starting off really early, that can be useful because it gives you a bit of a structure. You don't have to think about it too much. So a lot of people make Kratos. A lot of people copy like the League of Legends style. That's totally awesome. And also sometimes there's tutorials out there and you're basically copying what the artist is making because obviously they're going through a step by step. And what you produce out at the end of it is basically a crappy identical version of what they've already produced. So do think about that. Maybe you can adapt what they're doing in a different way. You've got only a couple of shots at making characters, so you want to make it really perfect. And that finally leads on to, are you a free thinking artist? So for example, when you're making art and you're learning, you want to be adaptive and you want to be creative at the same time, just like flex those mind muscles. You don't really want to be just this copy paste scanning machine that just copies YouTube videos, copies these tutorials and stuff. So interesting thing to think about when you're starting that project. I know a couple of you in that phase. This would be very useful. So picking the right project is obviously going to be important. So nice to break it down into aims and objectives. So is it going to be a complex character? Is it going to be a simple character? Those obviously come with caveats. I'd say a lot of people, when they first start out, they're super ambitious and they want to start with a very complicated character. So that can be a useful learning experience, but I don't really suggest it as your initial one. If you're a bit more experienced, then you can go for the more complex things. But you're basically going to have to gauge that along a bar. You also got to think about, are you in the mode? Are you creating a portfolio, or are you making things to learn? So the nice thing about making things to learn is very relaxed. If things aren't going so great and they don't look so good, that's okay, because you can get feedback for it. You're taking away the pressures of not having to make it look perfect. So sometimes what people say is that perfection is the enemy of good. So have that rolling in your head when you're picking the right project, basically. A student asked me physically in one of the lectures, what's the best way to learn? And I thought that was a very, very good question. He was asking the right things. So what I usually say to people is make sure you close the workflow chain really early. So again, that comes back to the complex versus simple. If you imagine you were running a marathon, for example, you wouldn't start with 27 miles. You would slowly build up. The first time you run, you probably get shin splints after the first 5 minutes. So continue cycles, closing the loop, maybe start with a very, very simple character, bake it, present it, light it, put it in Unreal Engine, and then you can add more layers of complexity. So you can see how we can cluster all this in together and really optimize the project that you're working on. So a lot of people miss this stuff out. So it's good that you're here to experience it from someone who's seen it hundreds of times. You can also make a bit of a battle plan for yourself. And as a red herring, I've said, track your time. Like there's videos that I've put that we can break down our time and stuff. If you're learning, what I say is just scrap that. Don't need to be timing yourself. You don't need Trello boards. You don't need any of that, because it's going to be absolutely useless. So often when you've got an experienced artist talking about how to get good in the industry, they apply what they currently use. So for example, those are the tactics that I use, and they apply it to people who are newbies. But to get there, that's not what I did. Okay. So tracking time, all those Trello, Gantt charts, just for the first ones, leave them to the side. Also think, what's your finishing time? So for example, time is money. For every month that passes, you've probably got these memberships, even though it's like extremely small. But bigger things than that, you've got your car, your rent. And so I do like to look at artists in terms of like their whole lifestyle when they're making art, because it is very important and it does affect it. So the quicker we can get things out, the more optimized and thoughtful with our strategy, the more money we're going to save in the long run. And you want to get to the industry as quick as possible so you can start earning money. It's very important. So also think about, what are the deliverables? So for example, am I producing just a sculpt like this? Or am I producing the low poly, the unwrap? Is it going to be engine, like a file? And then when you think in the terms of deliverables, that's what contractors do. So when I'm sending a contract out, what I'd really define is what is being delivered, so we can look at the end of that and start ticking things off. And so if you get in the habit of doing those deliverables, you know what your goals are, and also it fits in really well to the industry. So finding references obviously is a good start. So basically, a bit too far there. I've released that PDF. Hopefully you've read through it. Basically my strategies to how to break down references. Today, what we're going to actually go through is this forward planning phase and experiment a bit with some concepts and ideas. So analyzing your references. So once you've started, and this is what we're going to go through, is you're going to collect your references maybe on something like PureRef. And as you see, this is like a post-mortem of the project. And it's broken down. We use loads of different things here. So for example, cloth simulation. We've used different tactics in cloth rendering, so lattices. We've made some IMMs, so we're more efficient with creating belts. So these are all the things you would be forward planning, maybe writing out. Is there going to be hair? Is it going to be sculpted? Is it going to be hair planes? And you can see this is starting to stack up. So we're going to have to do more research, going to have to apply more time, and then obviously we've got to place those cards. So in the breakdown, what's usually nice to do is have a look at what materials we're going to be using. So metals, leathers, skin. Do they require any sorts of shaders? Do you understand shaders? And from the previous lecture, we were talking about breaking things down into unknowns, knowns, how long they would take. So you can combine this all in your analyzing the reference and breakdown stage. And also any of the technical challenges. So there was a really good question here. So when I start posing and breaking the symmetry, what should I model and what should I sculpt? So continuously ask these questions, run the workflow through your head. If you don't understand anything, maybe reach out and ask some people, because there's things that you won't even know that are questions. So for example, how do you work with symmetry? When you get to the low poly phase, do you bake symmetry halfway through? These all pop up and there's thousands of questions. Also, focus on what matters. So what you usually find is when people make these tutorials and stuff, they'll only do like a head or they'll fall short of the full workflow. They'll just get it to a stage where it's like not an engine, it's just like a little picture. So that's what they're doing. They're focusing on what matters to them, which is saving time and, selling a course. And you can take that as well. So for example, what are you producing your art for? Are you going to be putting it to Instagram, ArtStation? These are all going to require different levels of thumbnails. So if you're making a really weird shaped object or like this big thing and it's not going to fit into a thumbnail, then basically no one's going to be interested in looking at your artwork. And if it doesn't fit nicely onto a portfolio spread, then maybe you don't want to do it. So for example, on this one, the one I did 5 years ago, ran out of time on it for the final submission because it was on an ArtStation challenge. But you have to make sacrifices, so not a lot of time was spent on the lower sections. Certain things were rushed, for example, the top and the bottom. But that was because the planning wasn't as optimal as it could be. So for this, I knew there was going to be a turntable, so maybe it's more important that I focus on back sections, right sections, and front sections. And again, this adds to all the time. So this is what we're focusing on. So in combination with those loops that we were talking about, like closing the chain really quickly, within that chain, you want to obviously get lots of feedback, lots of immersion, and lots of talking and lots of tutorial watching. So the more of those little loops that you can close, the more feedback you get, the more tutorials you watch, and the more portfolio pieces. So hopefully you've absorbed all of that and you can see sort of a path of how to break things down. But really, if you just, all this takes is about a day or two, and it will make the hugest amount of difference. It will save you potentially multiple days. And we know that's important because obviously it saves money. We get to where we want to be quicker. So that leads us to optimizing for time. So as game artists, you're really keen on optimizing. I say to my friends that my favorite word is optimization. I don't know why, I just love it. I love optimizing things. I love optimizing time. I like optimizing teams. And this is your sort of like understanding how much work you've got. So for example, some of the users there, like just getting back from work, coming onto a stream, you've only got a certain amount of time. So that's also going to be factored into your projects, right? So maybe you've only got 3 hours in the evening, maybe you've got full entire days. So maybe your loops can be slightly bigger. And obviously when you're creating a project, you want to get as much bang for your buck. So when I mean buck, I mean time. So for example, are you learning a lot from certain things? Or is the project that you're doing just a repetition of what you already know? And then what I would say is that's not very optimized because you're just repeating the same thing. So with every project, you want to be pushing yourself and just being uncomfortable with making that project because you're learning so much new stuff. Usually students are pretty good with this. So we do have to push them a couple of times and say, well, this is easy. You've done this last year. Maybe you want to try something new, maybe some hair cards, maybe some different styles of rendering, different engine animations and things like that. Sometimes focusing on optimization leads to procrastination. At least this is what I observe in myself. Any tips how to overcome it? Yeah, that's very interesting. So are you meaning optimization in terms of starting out your project, like not being able to dive in, or optimization in terms of like the actual game asset? So optimization does lead to procrastination. So if you think about, if you do too much measuring, too much distractions in that sense, you're just wasting a bit of time. And the only thing you're getting good at is thinking about projects instead of actually doing them. So sometimes a lot of students, what they do is they don't even start a project because they think that they can do it. And it's only until you dive in that all these questions that are impossible to foresee come out. So I can reflect that in the sort of things I'm doing here. Streaming, making content online. I've never done that before. I don't really know what I'm doing. I just dive into it. Problems pop up and I solve them then and there. So my advice for you, and this is what I did for everything in my sort of career with art or anything, is chase after the things that are risky and fearful and just dive in and everything will work out. So there has to be a level of self-confidence in that, but that basically develops the more you do it. So it's kind of like this machine that keeps on perpetuating. So my advice is, there's that Maverick film that's just out on Netflix. Watch that. And one of the things they say is don't think, just do. So that's kind of like funny timing if you want to watch that film. So yeah, just don't think, just dive into it and you'll work it out along the way. Like you're clever enough, you're wise enough to understand what to do in the moment. You don't have to foreplan it, because all foreplanning is kind of like a form of anxiety, isn't it? It's basically fearful for the future. So yeah, that would be my advice. Just sort of like dive into it and enjoy the experience as you go on. So you've got some, just to clarify, it's mentality of what to do in a non-optimal way. What's the point of doing it? Yeah, so that's good. We talked about that. I have the same thing, like I'm looking for the best way to do something. I don't even start doing it because I'm always looking for the most optimized way. So we call it analysis paralysis. So have that in your mind. You know, whenever you're doing something, think analysis paralysis. And if you're going into that flow, try and break it. These sessions will prevent that. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a trek. You need some motivation along the way and some guidance system. I wasn't lying when I was first initially talking about the importance of these things. Sort of how we'd approach a new task. So what we'll do is we'll use the images from here. So usually what I start with, you can create these projects, you know, usually what people like to do is get like an PureRef file and then work from there. I usually like to be quite creative in Photoshop and just like draw on stuff. And then I would consider that my second brain almost. So I can always reference back to this to understand what's going on. And to be honest, even if you've started it, you can always come back to this. You know, even if you're halfway through it, you can just quickly whip up something like this. So do we have the people who are starting these projects in the chat? Let's give this horrible background. So I can definitely tell this is a Jay Hill thing. Rise of Star, I'm unfamiliar with the game. Okay, so let's start with this one. Yeah, what were your sort of like goals and aspirations? It's nice to talk aloud while I basically draw on this. Were you thinking, is it a practice piece or is it a portfolio piece? Somewhere between? Were there any ways that you were unfamiliar with that were kind of like extending and pushing you? Just basically any sort of questions that we can work off of. So first, when I look at this, there's no real way to, you know, perfect way to start. I usually break down and see things that I'm uncomfortable with. So let's take myself back, and if I was a student maybe a couple of 8 years ago, how I'd approach this. So for example, if I was looking at this central piece, that's obviously a very key landmark. Now what's happening there, we're going to have some kind of shader, right? So from that shader, what are the requirements? So for example, okay, what are we rendering in? We're going to be rendering in Unreal 5, or we're going to be rendering in Marmoset. So those are obviously going to have different effects. Marmoset's a very quick renderer. Unreal 5 is more kind of impressive, I guess. We've also got some glowing eyes. I'd say that's basically linked into the shader. So within Marmoset, you might want to, if you're unfamiliar with this, do a little bit of initial research. So from here, okay, we've got a technical research task. So what does that involve? So maybe initially you might just take one of these into Unreal Engine. You might take it into Marmoset and do a very quick test. Okay, so maybe one of these is better than the other at generating these effects. So you can see how deep we're going in already. So this is an important part of your character, but the decisions we make are going to be very important. And the last thing you want to do is realize all this halfway through the project, right? So for example, with the tech research, might be that I already know the answers to these, but you know, these might be different in terms of how they're rendering and portraying that element. So for example, Marmoset's not very good at the kind of like crystalline, emissive and light emitting. So it could be that the Unreal Engine's a little bit better for your options. There's more shading and lighting options that sort of like illuminate near objects. Whereas Marmoset, you have to kind of fake that. So I've done a few projects. It's very frustrating. Also in Unreal Engine, there's more opportunities to make more complex bits. So for example, if there's a certain effect that you desire, whether it's kind of like an advanced Fresnel, really refining how that looks, then definitely that's another point to Unreal Engine. So for example, there we just sort of decided that potentially this could be good in Unreal Engine. Now maybe from Unreal Engine that requires, you know, you're unsure, you've never been inside of Unreal Engine. Okay, so how much time do I have to put into that? So that's another factor. How much time do I have to do to learn Engine? Quick answer is really quick. So if you know Marmoset, you'll know Unreal Engine. It's just more things, more adaptable. So also what I'd look at is basically somewhat of a material breakdown. So I'd look here, and on the side list, I'll just make a small profile. So we've got skin, or like a dark skin. So it's going to be like an interesting shader. Got a form of metal. I think that's metal. Hard to see in the artist's render there. On the other side, we'll do some more technical things. So for example, we have cloth. Now, is that going to be simulated or is that going to be sculpted? That's also going to feed into how much time it's going to take. So for example, we can put that up here. Now you're going to make that decision. So without layering too much information, you know, maybe you're only interested in this section for your portfolio piece to like grab the attention of someone. Maybe you need some more portfolio pieces. So for example, this, we don't have to focus too much on cloth and simulation, save ourselves some time. We don't have to focus on too much on sculpting these areas. So it might be that, you know, you put that lower down on the priority list, but we've got that there. So we've got the cloth. What else? We can't see too many materials. Maybe we'll definitely put the shader and the crystal there. So we've already got that. So cloth, crystal, maybe horn. I think horn is going to be, slightly different from everything else. It's more of a dry, crusty, although it is one seamless integration, but it does have emissive glowing effects. So I'd probably separate that off as its own subject. And maybe also we have some very small leather pieces. So it's only under really close inspection that these things start to pop out. And also what we have here, we have some dangly pieces. So maybe this is going to be in the form of some string. What that might require is like an IMM brush. But if we're only focusing on this upper thumbnail, maybe we don't need an IMM because we're not making millions of them, If the character had this all over their body, then maybe we would make an IMM. So an IMM is just a tool that's used to create strings. Can be made pretty quickly. But for this one, you could sculpt that pretty quick. So maybe it's just a normal sculpt or a model. So is this making sense, guys, how this is? We're almost, by the process of writing all this down, thinking about it, we're starting to make links, okay? And we're starting to make links and we're optimizing our time. Because we're optimizing with our time, things are getting better in our lives. It's a knock-on effect. Yeah, go on, learn Unreal 5. I always suggest that. So on the material side, so we've got dark skin, we've got metals. These are going to be much of the same. Nice thing is we don't have any hair cards, so there's no rendering that we have to do. But maybe that's a future project to put to the side so you can rank up as an artist. So maybe later we want to do some hair cards. Could be that you've already done that, and just look for anything else that's missing. So maybe some more subsurface, realistic skin, because this is going to be quite hard. So for example, we might not use too much subsurface. So some kind of like skin shader might be interesting. But again, that might almost be on your portfolio. With this tail as well, how are we going to make that tail? This could link back into the IMMs or just normal sculpting. So for example, because this has got a very specific shape, obviously it's going to be repeated. We also have to think, because we're making game meshes, how are we going to make that in the game? So am I going to create that all on one UV texture sheet and take up all loads of UV space? Or am I going to have that copied and overlapping on each other to save on space? So those are some of the decisions we can make as well. For this, I would probably suggest, because it's got sort of like a hero piece, I would unwrap all of these uniquely, but I would only model one of them. So you'd model one, high poly, maybe put some varied information on it, build the low poly around that. Don't try and get too smart with creating the low poly first and then assigning it. You can just unwrap it all at once. And then we have unique textures. So this goes all the way down. And then maybe you can put some things like gradients on it and it opens up just some more options. And there's not too much, we could really look into it. There's not too much surface area on this character. So for example, we don't have layers and layers of cloth like the other ones. So think about, we're going to have a lot of spare UV space. So that means that we can afford to make decisions like this where we have additional UVs, right? So yeah, hopefully that's got you thinking about sort of project. This can be a fun process as well, just scribbling on stuff. What I'd usually do is basically take a screenshot of that, maybe like a little snip, and then just put it in my Pure, just so I can always see what I'm doing. Because sometimes, when you're getting into things, you can get a bit lost, and you can come back to your self-director, the person who's like guiding your workflow, like the one we're doing now, and you can just reference it. Just make sure you're on track with your goals and stuff. Okay, so as the person here for the sci-fi female, I'm going to put a little outline. Any questions while I put this outline on? Any further questions on that process, or people who want other things covered? Hopefully that's a little bit easier to see. Yeah, you're always thinking about them, so they're always on the forefront. But we don't want to be thinking, do we? Like, especially when we're doing art, we just want to be lost in making that art. So the thing I like about this, and it applies to everything, is just do allocate your thinking at the start. And we're just trying to think about everything, every possibility that could happen. So what we're going to run into, and this is good project management anyway. You do this on games and do this on art. So imagine the entire workflow with your team's experience. We'll all discuss that in meetings. And then we'll see what the risks are, things that are unknown. Literally try and prove everything on paper first, and then we can start the project. So you're right. It's really nice to have this and not have to think about it, basically. Okay, so with this character, we'll do a similar thing. I won't do it so much because it will just be repeating it. So obviously we can break down the different materials. Here we have slightly more, and they're in subcategories. So we've kind of got this latex, not sure what it is, but it's the bodysuit or the body stuff. So it could be that that's comprised of multiple sections. So we can count them. So 1, 2, 3, we've got some sort of like mesh network here. So we've got the main,
the second, and the hex mesh. Okay, so something's appeared here. So with the hex mesh, how are we going to make that? So for example, we can do that in ZBrush as physical geometry. That's an option that is very viable. Probably my preferred option is to do that in Substance. Whoa, big screen, small Wacom, very hard to write. So benefit of that in Substance, obviously we can change the scale of that from a distance. So for example, in your thumbnail, if we're thinking about it, this might not be portrayed very well. So when it comes to your final, it could be that we decide to make these bigger. So I know it's not similar to the concept, but maybe the concept artist wasn't thinking about that. So as 3D artists, we have to make a couple of decisions. So with Substance, that means that we're going to have a better workflow for it. All the folds are going to be done in ZBrush, then we can continue from there. So other elements, we've got hair. This is going to be a big project. So hair, never underestimate how long it's going to take. What are you going to do it in? Are you going to do it in sort of these third-party softwares, which is okay. You can also do it in XGen. Now, XGen is pretty good. I think you have more flexibility. It's kind of like that Marmoset versus Unreal. And the third-party, really attractive when you first start, but as soon as you want to make something slightly different, it's just destroyed. So the safest bet is kind of go to the XGen. Although, you know, stuff are coming up nowadays. We've got Blender. We do want to keep really current with the workflows. So my promise to you is I'll always pick the best stuff. I'll never be a loyalist to a software. So for example, Blender might be interesting. I know there's a lot of coverage in terms of hair, but third party might be good as well. Also, what we've got a lot of hard surface and potentially simulated areas. I'd say, for example, with this coat, might be tempting to simulate it. So we could do that in Marvelous Designer. Now, my gut instinct is there's not too much hanging. There's a lot of sculpted elements, so I would really prefer to sculpt this and focus on those strands. There's not much benefit that you can get out of simulation here. So with that as well, we're also going to save on time. So we're just getting a slight time optimization. Nice one here. We've got some special effects. So we've got some VFX in here that we have to factor in. So that's actually, I know how to do some really cool ones on that for like Marmoset. In Unreal Engine, you might actually want to make some proper particles. But if you're taking a screenshot, then for example, we want to have this static. But are you also doing a 3D video, like a turnaround? So if you're doing a 3D video, maybe you want this VFX animated. But if you're not doing that, then you just want it static. So that's another time saver, and it's another workflow thing to think about when it comes to this VFX. Same with the drips that are going on here. You know, are these going to be cards or are they going to be actual physical assets? What else have we got? So got the body latex. That's obviously going to be one. We've got the hex. We've got our hair cards. These are the major areas. The VFX demonstration, decision on how we're sort of like simulating the fibers. I think along with the coat as well, if you're not used to it, how do we do zips? Okay, so how are zips going to be rendered as low poly? So how detailed are you going to go with that? Are you going to make it as one square? And I could do some videos on this on sort of like the best options for that. Maybe you could do some pre-tests. So over here, I'll always be thinking about tech research. So if you're unsure of how to do a zip, put that off to a side task and just do some tech research. Just a very small slice of try and bake zip just to see how good it looks. And then you know the strategy for your workflow. Also got some interesting light emitting areas. So for example, we have some emissive. If you understand how to do emissive, these might require specific lighting setups, and they're all going to reflect off the surface. So I always love to put in some kind of metal, some skin, some cloth, some shininess, some dryness, some lights, and then the lights are going to affect all those materials. It's going to make it look very nice, so you can have better roughness. And then with those shadows and those highlights, if you have more complex objects, you have more complex shadows, and that makes more interesting assets. So hopefully you followed that on. Just basically do more than physically possible. So that's about it, really. I think that's going to be a very fun project to work on. Let's have an update with the comments. So pick the comment. He said the same thing. It looked like something he would make. Who's that? Focus is to practice anatomy on it and make it a portfolio piece. Awesome. Right. That's good. So we've got our primary focus. So, you know, we're going to really be interested in the elements here. The nice thing about doing these is why it's good to practice on. I call it the zombie effect. So the zombie effect when you're creating characters is you get a bit of forgiveness when you're making errors. So say, for example, you're practicing anatomy and things don't look quite good, then it's okay because it's only a monster. It isn't realistic skin. and you're not going to be worried about that, and you can focus on the more important things. So that's why I really don't like people starting likeness sculpts too early, because it can be really frustrating. You get really disheartened. You're not going to want to do it because it's never going to look like the actual thing. So it's good via the zombie effect, I call it, because when people make zombies, is base it around that. So that's a strategy that other people can sort of take from your example. Going all in with this, we'll learn UE5 properly this time, even if it takes months to finish the project. Hell yeah, that is the vibe. That is the vibe I want, guys. It's just, if you approach it with that energy, it's going to be so much easier. It's going to be so much more fun. I really like that I'm starting to see pops of people like taking this on board, you know, making their own channels and getting inspired to make some things in really important optimized areas like Unreal 5, which is going to be the future of gaming and the future of VFX and stuff. So I'm glad you're here getting the advice for that. Always like thinking of this stuff, but writing them one by one makes things more clear. Yeah, and the hair card's in Blender. Okay, cool. I'd love to see how you get on with that. So if you sort of post your updates in the work in progress, that'd be really cool. And so other people can learn from those experiences. So I think one thing that I learned while I was going through my career, a very individual competitive person, was I used to keep all the information to myself. And it kind of makes sense when you're doing that and you think that everyone around you is to compete with. But what you find is it doesn't really work out like that. So it's more important to share your ideas and think about them and to teach and learn. Look at me, for example, you know, I'm giving all the tips for free, even though it's a paid membership, but I'll usually give everything for free, and it's not going to come back. It's just going to increase the motivation for the industry, and it's going to benefit you in the long run. So yeah, and it's free. So that's just such a big bonus. Like, for example, you know, we're going in Maya, making all these XGen stuff. XGen isn't even that good, to be honest, when it comes to making hair cards, because there's so many errors that happen in it. I've definitely wrote documentation pages long, which is like troubleshooting XGen for other artists in the team. And yeah, Blender third-party plugins, these are definitely coming up. So a question regarding materials further down: how to better separate meshes for UV layouts and materials. Okay, so yeah, this is a good question, and it's something we haven't covered here too much. So as an additional, I'm glad you asked it. So as an additional layer to this character, so we've done our layouts of what materials there are, what technical challenges are, what the approach is, and we sort of alluded to the UV layouts. But if you're comfortable with it, it can be quite intimidating, especially if you've never done UVs before. So if you haven't done UVs before, I would bypass this process. Maybe do it a little bit just to theorize, but it's better to dive in and just start UVing stuff. So usually what I'll do is I'll just add an additional layer, maybe put it to a lower opacity, get a brush. And what I'll do is I'll concept the UV layout on the concept itself. So looking at this character, we're not deciding how many UVs there are going to be yet, because we're going to decide that as we're going along. So for example, I can start to just shade these areas, and maybe you want to see it more, so just turn down the opacity. So I know that all the legs are going to be sort of connected together, and that's going to be a certain space. Now with the upper torso and the head, I probably want a bit more information there. So for example, we can now draw our second UV in purple. So now we understand that we're working with 2 UVs, because the head's going to take up a lot of detail. It's going to be a big thumbnail, so we definitely want a lot of pixels in that space. The eyes are going to be their own object, and you see I'm almost going to make a new UV channel here. Maybe if this was a human eye, I'd create another UV for the eyes. However, yours doesn't have any detail in it, so there's no iris, there's no cornea, so therefore we don't need any texture detail. So maybe you can just include that in the texture space of your head. Okay, so that's going to be a very good decision, and you can talk about that decision in like an art interview. That'd be very, very impressive. I made this decision because I wanted to save on UV space, because I know how important GPU calls are, and the person will be very impressed by that. So the next one, obviously the torso. Now this could be all inclusive. In current gen, I would probably take preference to break this off as a second or third UV as well. So now we're starting to really understand how this is broken down. So we're just almost like your classic gym split. We're doing lower, upper body. Now if this had equipment, it might be slightly different. So for example, over here, we've got some more hard surface and soft surface. So it might be that the coat's going to be a separate section with all the elements here. And it might be that the inside of the body is its own UV set. And that could be important because we need a little bit more detail when it comes to the hex pattern down here. whereas the rest of the stuff potentially might not need it. Now with the accessory at the top, we could probably include that with the coat. We're thinking about surface area, but then the more we add to it, we start to understand that we might be running out of space. So as soon as that starts to happen, then we can just split this up further. Now with the weapon at the back, that's obviously going to be its own UV set. We want that to shine out a bit, and honestly, when it comes to characters, we might be splitting that off. It might be used on a different character in the industry, and we might want to use it again. And then, for example, with the top of the head, we're going to be splitting the hair cards. That's a said thing. The hair cards are always going to be separated. There we go, nice little purple hair. And then with the face, again, that's obviously going to be its own UV. And even further to that, you know, we're now splitting off the eyes because we've got some eye texture detail there. And you're probably going to be going up in there. Now, even further to that, we look really close. We even have some eyelashes. So maybe we want to separate those off as a separate piece. So now we're working with a lot of UVs, and that's not too uncommon. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 UVs, totally fine for the games industry. But this is how it's basically going to be displayed and laid out really well. Yeah. So just looking over it, one more thing that we're going to need probably an 8th set of UVs. I wonder if you can see it. It's special effects. Okay, so this is going to require a lot of high frequency texture just to get those nice wisps out. So that's another texture layer that we can do. You know, these little assets that we can spring here and there and just design it. But that could be considered presentation. So it might be that you have a render plate down here that can just be sort of like presentation UV. And then you can always use these again. So I know Jay Hill makes a lot of the female, you know, potentially he's using a lot of the same base mesh, the same materials in his substance, the same VFX, that sort of stuff. So look out for them. He might be using, you know, the same eye and all that sort of thing. So yeah, really fun. Yeah, cool. Blender is free and doesn't crash as often as Maya. Probably true. Depends what some of the plugins are a bit dodgy. So you love sharing stuff with people, especially about Blender. Even some seniors are being surprised with stuff you can do there. Exactly. Yeah, 100%. I've seen the adoption of Blender from really day one and how students view it. If anyone knows that lineage. How about I make a reptile dragon eyes for the first concept? Should I take such decisions on my own or stick to the concept and optimization? You could make a dragon eye. Obviously, it would change the vibe of the character. Now, maybe you just want to experiment with the eyes. Maybe you can make more of like a White Walker. You know, is it going to be full white? That gives a soulless look to the character. That might be the vibe that you're going for. Or maybe you want to just change it up a little bit if you just want to experiment with another eye capsule. So maybe there is some really discolored cornea. Like you've got some details in there, but it's still from a distance giving that really blank, dead look. So that's kind of like a double win, how you could optimize that workflow. So just got to experiment with yourself, whatever you're feeling. And again, that takes, you know, a little bit more time. Is it going to be worth it? It's up to you. So I was planning on skipping the skipping the weapon, since it's not really clear and what it is, and there's no other angle of it. What do you think? So yeah, I would ask. We could even delete this, you know. Let's do that. There's nothing better than physically seeing it, you know, instead of just talking about it. So what could we do? I'm just going to select this. Shift F5, content aware. Okay, hopefully it doesn't do some AI bollocks and then add another head. Okay, let's just hide these layers. Now, is that taking away from everything? Is it adding to it? Those are the decisions we're making in terms of optimizing for time. I would say it hasn't actually added anything. I don't think it's taken anything away. And you're right, it's very unclear. It's going to be huge time sink. There's loads of detail in there. No one's caring about that. If people are cared at weapons, they go to weapon art. In my role, I'd actually outsource this. I'd outsource this to a weapon artist. I wouldn't put this on the character artist, just to optimize that team. So yeah, just flunk that off, I'd say. And you're already doing like hard surface stuff up here, hard surface stuff over there. So it's not like you're adding anything. You know, you're not adding any additional skills. There's too much hard surface. So I think you can have confidence that that's the right decision. I didn't even notice there was a weapon before someone mentioned it. Well, there you go. Definitely. Yeah, these are going to be fun projects. You've also got different latexes and different leathers. So the nice thing about this is you don't have to make it grungy and complicated. So when I'm making things in the industry, it's usually like creature artists. Surprisingly, creature artists are quite difficult because all the textures and the realism of the skin and like all these stuff, you have to be really defined with like the texturing process. Sometimes it's just given to someone else to work on. Like say if it's a dragon, there's so much work about. Now the benefit with picking subjects like this is you've got really nice broad materials. So as long as you just make the material nice and simple and realistic, then it's going to have a huge coverage and you can save time when it comes to texturing. And it's not like more texturing is going to make this look better. So sometimes it's nice just to have the broad elements, you know. I'd say, so contrasting it against this is obviously going to be a really cool texturing process. You're going to be using different cavity, curvature, masking it, making sure it's not repetitive, maybe doing your own shades of elements and gradients. So this is a real cool texturing workflow, whereas the hard surface stuff is usually don't get out of it. So just remember, guys, I'm not versusing them. They're just different things at different times. So for example, you know, this one's focusing on different stuff. So it's like maybe some hair technicals, more simple materials, which is fine. And then the other one focusing on more texture and anatomy. So it's a nice contrast of two potential portfolio pieces to think about. And there's nothing wrong with any of them, do you know? Okay, answer some final questions before we get off. It's an 8-week class making a character for games and rendering in Unreal 5. Cool. I'm actually joining so many communities and live sessions in different places every day. I love consuming information. Cool. So I'm going to be doing a similar thing. I'm actually going to be making a full character process. Just don't know how to deploy it just yet. I think I'm not familiar how he's done it, but what I was thinking, and you guys can make suggestions basically, is that I would actually do them live, more of like a lecturing process, how we go over, for example, how we've done today, but then actually apply that to a live case study and go through it and basically go through the process in the weeks as it goes along. I think wanting to provide like the complete package that you would get at university, but for a fraction of the price. And then also because it'd be the first one, it'd be a fraction of that. And so I kind of love the idea that for even probably cheaper than this, you could get like a full experience for nothing. Yeah, interesting. So I think there's real benefit from, obviously it's nice to make something and pre-record it and then have people watch over it. But there is a difference between actually like talking about it live with people and also while you're going through talking about what decisions are made and stuff. So especially when I was learning, I didn't appreciate too much the replays where someone's kind of just like commenting over what they've already done, because that's kind of like a form of hindsight. I'd really love the idea of like live problems. Like I sometimes, even when I'm lecturing, just like insert problems on purpose, just so like people can think about how to solve them. And that's really what's important when it's when you're learning. So there's nothing worse than following the perfect path, the pure path, because it doesn't exist. You're never going to go through a project unless you're later experienced. So sometimes it gives you a false sense of security. And also you want to be good. You want to be a good employee. So you want to have loads of interesting technical elements that can be solved straight away if someone asks for it. So it needs to have full coverage. I was even thinking not even, following multiple subjects of a character, like not just one character, but like hopping between AAA examples, just so every single element is covered. Because at the end of the day, what the most important thing is the education of it, not the copying and pasting, like I was saying at the start of the lecture. So yeah, tell me what you think about that sort of stuff and how I could formulate it. Obviously, you can see that don't have analysis paralysis, so I'm letting it come as it goes. We could start with I was going to do a 3-day live series on retopology. I really like the idea of, even before completing the course and like starting on the different elements, is teach you a skill that is transferable into making money. So for example, we'd start with retopology and then you can translate that skill into maybe getting some outsourcing gigs while you're working on your portfolio. And then while you're working on your full characters, you already are a master of retopology. And then along that way, you're earning money and also learning to the extent where you can become a full character artist. I think in my head, that's really cool value for people. So I want to experiment with it. I was going to try it out, because who wants to be working, a job that's not related to the skill that they're doing while learning a character? It'd be so much better if you were doing something a little bit smaller that was in line with what you were wanting to do, and then it's like a multiplied effect, which I think would be really cool. So I think we'll do this one. So you're deciding to approach this in Marvelous, which is cool. Pick up that software. That can be cool. Especially because, oh, you've already started. That's nice. So especially because it's a very free hanging asset, that'd be quite difficult to sculpt. Accessories and wraps in the next stage. So this is a good example of like quite a nice closed loop, like we were talking about. There's not too much complexity, but there's a lot to learn there. So for example, like the sculpted elements, maybe some additional pieces. The references are nice and broad, and the materials, so we can work with that within a parameter. Let's have a look at in terms of feedback. Let's start with the base. So it depends if you want feedback for like the anatomy, or you just want it for the final render of like how everything's going to come across. Yeah, let's take this guy into Photoshop. So yeah, while I set this up, just add some comments of what you want covered and such. Maybe you guys something crazy is the new mouse that I've got. So I'll try and hold it up. Can you see this like bloody orb of Sauron? So I've been using that. I've been doing all sorts on that. It's been quite fun. It's got 4 buttons on it. Imagine that. Death Star. Yeah. Maybe I'll do a video on it, how I use it for making stuff. Yeah. So in terms of feedback, I think the first thing it's an interesting one, because with the hippo, there's very soft, hard elements to it. So if you think about the skin, like you'd knock on it, it'd be very like tough and leathery. So I think what you could do is just increase and sharpen the bevels. So maybe get something like a cut on top of that. Let's see if we can do an outline. Yeah, so I'd just go a bit sharper and start to chisel off the surfaces. Obviously we've got like some like more rounded sections, but I'd put that on top of an already flat surface, and it's going to be very scratchy. So when you get your damn standard, instead of having like a broad soft one, I would take an alpha that's like a little bit sharper like that, and then use that across here, and that's going to give a nice, think of it like, you know, those foam things when you'd have like when kids practice swimming, and it has that like kind of like little wrinkle to it. Like I think that's almost a similar thing, so it might be interesting to look at those and have that as a reference. And with the concept, the silhouette's very sharp. Now it's going to be hard to depict here, but in any moment you really want to refine these kind of like these curves. It's going to give it a nice sort of like dabbled effect. In terms of the anatomy, probably just blend the upper arm and the bicep into each other, because it's not so clear what the underlying structure is, like where the bone is located, and it kind of just looks like 2 objects are mashing into each other. So maybe just have some more fibrous sections here and potentially reduce the amount of curvature. And I think this area, obviously it's not a real character. It wants a little bit more bone when it comes to like the radius and the ulna. So have that just like poking out a little bit more. So with the thick characters like this, you basically want to go for something that has thick joints. So right now it's looking a bit human-like and a bit realistic. So the thickness of a hand when it comes to a creature usually comes from the base. So maybe we can do like an adaptation here. So let's see how we can do it. So you usually circle something and Control T to transform, and then come to this grid, and basically we can adapt this. So obviously it's going to warp a bit, but you'll see if I increase the thickness of the hand, ignore the fingers because they're going to come out like Mickey Mouse because of this warping, but what we're really looking for is like the overall shape. But if you increase the thickness of the wrist, it automatically gives like a more bulky feel to the character. So you just want to get rid of that humanoid element unless you're going with it, because I look at this concept and he looks really thick, almost like, you know, those Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle enemies and stuff. So maybe just increase the thickness of the Now these are always hard to blend the anatomy of an animal back into the anatomy of a human. So for this, what I would do is I would, depending on the reference, I think they've done it also, you want a really big trapezius muscle, and that's going to blend the thickness of the head back into the shoulders, and the shoulders are going to be really short and stubby and rounded, and so you're going to get multiple shapes like this. It's just removing those humanoid elements that I think are distracting this piece as well. Like if you look at the size of this shoulder, it's very flat and wide, and it's like almost coming back onto the pectoral, so it's really flat. So I just want to develop that back into here. There's a lot of tightness under the armpit, so you might want to give a little bit more space, especially when it comes to simulation. So for example here, you might have had difficulties with the simulation because there's not enough space there, and the strength of this character, you know, the striations, you see how tight that is. So tight, it's almost like Captain America's gear, you know, that really hard stuff. So maybe you can't usually get that with simulation, so use the simulation as your base and then start to sculpt on top of that, I suggest, basically. Oh, we got a crash, maybe. Oh dear. Right, so to be honest, that probably is a good place to cap it, because ZBrush has sort of adapted that. That was the last point I was going to give. So let's have a look at the Discord. So yeah, really cool stuff. So that's it, guys. Hopefully you've been infused with your projects and like how you can save some time on it, focus on the most important things, and also focusing on the learning of it, and also getting a really good project. So hopefully your focus has been lasered down, like we were talking in the initial lectures, and it's going to save you some time. So looking forward to what you make in a week, 2 weeks. Obviously, week might be a little bit too fast. But yeah, implement those ideas that we went over. Maybe post them in the works in progress, like your own breakdowns, like we did here. Nice to get in the habit of that. So maybe did like some material breakdowns, some draw overs, and just mention it in your works in progress. So unless there are any final questions, I would say thanks for coming. I'll catch you next week. Just leave a comment. How was that, guys? Do you enjoy it? Is this infused with magic? It's infused with pain. That's what it's infused with. It's sucking out all the energy, and I just put it into this little orb. All right, great stream, guys. I will catch you next week. Thanks for coming, and as always, and turning up live. Catch you around, guys. Bye-bye.